Hello, everyone. This is Kyra Esgate with America Service Commissions, and thank you so much for joining us for today's session on developing a program development strategy. I want to encourage you to mute your line if you are not speaking, just to assist us with sound quality throughout today's session. So I want to go over our agenda for today, and I'm really excited to have you join us today and to be able to have this session with you. Actually, program development is one of my favorite topics and is one that I spent a great deal on when I was a staff member at California Volunteers many years ago. And we're hoping that to today's session that we can actually encourage discussion and comments and examples of successes or challenges that you've all faced throughout the country in your work to develop additional programs in your portfolio. I want to encourage folks to also use the chat box to highlight examples or to ask questions along the way as well, as we know that sometimes folks have some issues with audio. And I also just want to point out too that we have a large group that will be joining us today, and we'll have new staff members or relatively new commission staff members as well as more experienced staff as well. So want to really encourage us to share our expertise and our vantage point regarding new program development. So you'll see on your screen today our agenda. It is an aggressive agenda. We have a lot to try to cover, so do want to be mindful of that. But what you'll see again is welcome and the overview of the session. We're going to have a conversation about why develop a program development strategy for your commission. We're going to talk about doing some analysis of your current portfolio and also identification of potential priorities, how you might think about doing some of that analysis, some strategy considerations for you to think about as well. Outreach approaches, so once you kind of identify those priorities and know what exists in your portfolio and what it looks like in your state, really how might you do some outreach in order to cultivate new programs. Talking about training and technical assistance strategies as well as staffing considerations, because one of the things that I think we will see throughout today's session is that program development work is, I think, fun and exciting, but it also is very time consuming as well. So making sure that you have appropriate staff in place or consultants or others to help you with that work. Also, we'll have Q&A, but encourage folks to ask questions along the way, particularly using the chat box. And then we'll talk about the preview of the upcoming series webinars. So moving on to the next slide, the overview of the session. Again, this is a joint partnership, this webinar series between ASK and the Service Year Alliance. And we came together on this series because we both feel very strongly about wanting to encourage and support state commission efforts to develop new AmeriCorps programs or to expand existing programming. And I think this is particularly important in underserved areas or areas that are underrepresented in AmeriCorps programming around the nation. As I mentioned, today's webinar is the first in a 6-part series, and at the end of today's call, we'll talk about the upcoming sessions that will be happening. We're going to be doing one per month over the course of the next 6 months. And again, our goal here is to expose commission staff to various strategies that could be applicable to your efforts and share best practices as well as lessons learned along the way. So we hope that this will be an opportunity for you to really take a step back and think about how your commission approaches program development. For those of you less familiar with Service Year, just wanted to provide you a high-level overview of our partner, Service Year Alliance. Again, Service Year is a nonprofit organization that is looking to make a year of service a common expectation and opportunity for all young Americans. And part of their work, I should say all of their work, is really organized into 4 buckets that you see identified on this slide. So you'll see the Service Year Exchange that many of you are familiar with, which is the online marketplace for potential members and programs to find one another. The second bucket is national recruitment awareness and core member support. So really trying to create that national conversation about inspiring individuals to serve their community through AmeriCorps and other like programs. The third area, and really fits into the bucket that we're talking about today, is growing Service Year programs. So looking at ways to expand and scale existing programs and also identifying opportunities for new programming around the country. And then the final piece or final bucket for Service Year is policy and advocacy. So that is really the work that they're doing in Washington, D.C. and around the country to really develop policies that support the growth of national service and like programs. So again, a little bit more information about our partner Service Year. If you'd like to learn more about Service Year, I encourage you to check out their website, which you see on the screen. So with that, we're going to move on to our next slide, which is talking about why develop a program development strategy. So I think that many of you have already kind of thought about this, but we wanted to kind of put out there some ideas and reasons why a commission might want to take a step back and actually think about developing a thoughtful program development strategy. The first one, and I think many of you are aware of this, is that actually statute stipulates that commissions have responsibilities for program development within their state. So I know that we tend to spend a lot of time and energy on the monitoring aspect of our work, and certainly that is an important piece as well. But really, statute also envisions a strong role for commissions in developing new programs within their state. Also, it is an opportunity for you to address emerging community needs. We know that certainly there are consistent needs around the country and in each of your states, whether it be in education, health, et cetera. But we also recognize that there often are emerging opportunities or emerging needs, really, that we could address with service programs. Another reason to think about a strategy is it may help to diversify your portfolio. It's not uncommon for a commission to have a number of programs that are of the same size, are dealing with the same issue, are all located in the same area. And really, this is an opportunity for you to take a step back and look at your portfolio and really figure out how you might want to or be able to diversify your portfolio. It's also a way to demonstrate that national service can be a tool for elected officials and other key stakeholders. So I think often we don't think about how we can really help show folks that service can be a strategy for meeting community needs. And so really this is a way, if there's a thoughtful strategy in mind that's taking into account the priorities of elected officials and other key stakeholders in your state, it's really an opportunity for you to demonstrate how service can be a strategy. It also provides an opportunity for you to evaluate local program development versus national direct expansion, or both. So by that we mean is the best way for you to potentially address community needs in your state, local program development, where you're really trying to seed those local programs, or might it be that there is already an existing national direct program that addresses that issue and might be a good fit for your state? In reality, it might be a combination of both, but really taking a step back and thinking about developing a strategy is a great way for you to answer that question for your particular commission. It also can provide an opportunity for high-performing existing grantees to expand their programming either into new regions or indoor issue areas. And so certainly, and we know a lot of high-performing programs are having that conversation internally with themselves, but it's also an opportunity for you as a commission to say, hey, we really want to expand in this particular area or this geographic area or this issue area. X program, would you be interested in being part of that strategy to help us with that? So I think that's also another important thing to think about in developing a strategy. And then finally, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but certainly one that we wanted to share with you some of our ideas about why this is important, is that it can improve program quality of new programs by front-loading training and technical assistance. So by that, what we mean is that if you really have a very intentional and intensive program development strategy, you probably are going to end up front-loading a lot of the information that potential programs would need in order to be successful. And as a result of that, what we've seen in many instances, not all, but in many instances, that leads to programs being able to launch, get off the ground faster, and be more successful in that first year, which we all know is a very, very challenging year when you're launching an AmeriCorps program. So again, just some thoughts as to why you might want to be thinking about developing a program development strategy for your commission. So now I want to move on to approaches to program outreach. So I think for many commissions, there has been traditionally the come one, come all approach, and that certainly is very, very appropriate, and I would submit that that's something that commissions should always be doing, is that you want to make your announcement that your NOFO or whatever the guidelines are in your state, that this is available right now if you're interested in learning more about AmeriCorps. Here are the ways that you do that. Here's when the application is due, blah, 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 blah. And that's really, really important, and we encourage commissions to continue to do that because you can often identify really promising new programs as part of that. But we also think that probably taking a more strategic outreach approach is also really, really important. And what we've been hearing consistently from commissions over the last few years is that you feel like you've kind of saturated the market with folks that kind of have a little bit of interest in AmeriCorps and just want to know more. And so now it's really the time to kind of roll up your sleeves and really think about being much more intentional about who you're outreaching to based on the priorities of your commission. No matter what your approach is, if it's come one, come all, a little bit more strategic or targeted in your outreach, or both, I always want to remind you that you must make sure that you are considering your procurement and grant making regulations within your state. We know some of you have a kind of wide open playing space on that in your particular state, and others we know that there are parameters that you must follow in order to make process is compiled there. But whatever it is in your state, just making sure that you're aware of that and that your outreach strategy is aligned with that is very, very important. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how you might want to start this process. So the first piece here that we think is important is actually doing an analysis of your existing program portfolio. And so here are a number of things that you might want to look at in your portfolio, and I really want to invite others to suggest other things that they look at their portfolio when they're doing an analysis of where the kind of the gaps are in the portfolio. So one area is geography, and so understanding kind of where the underserved areas in your state, and also too, if you have large pockets of AmeriCorps programs and members in particular areas, whether they be urban, rural, et cetera. And so by population percentage, we mean that if you, for example, have a large urban area in your state and that represents 20% of your state's population, but you have 50% of your members in that particular area, there's nothing wrong with that. But it might be something for you to think about is like, oh, maybe we want to do outreach in other areas and not necessarily focus on program development in that particular city. Issue area is another important one to understand. And again, each commission feels a little bit differently about how they want to diversify their portfolio by issue area. Some really value that. Others really want to focus their resources in one particular area. There's no right or wrong answer there, but I think, again, understanding where your portfolio is in this is very, very important. So how many programs do you have in particular issue areas? For example, how many of your programs are in the education space? How much of your funding, what percentage of your funding is in a particular issue area, and how many members are serving there as well. Just getting a better sense of, again, how that plots out for the issue area is really, really valuable. Program analysis, better understanding your programs themselves. So how many of your programs are more veteran programs versus newer programs? What are the size of those programs? Are they relatively small? Are they very, very large? Are they in between? So understanding the funding and MSY for each of those programs. What's your cost per MSY across your portfolio? And also, too, are those programs capable of expanding in new issue areas or geographically? If you have a sense of that already just based on your knowledge of the programs, I think that can be valuable information as well. Member profile. Are all of your programs geared towards the same type of member profile? Are they all geared towards young people? In certain areas of the state, do you see different demographics for members? Kind of better understanding what types of members that your programs are targeting can also be a valuable piece of information for you as well. And together, all of this information, after you conduct this analysis, that's going to really help you to identify gaps that may be opportunities for growth for you. So I want to pause for a moment and see if anyone either in the chat box or on the audio has any other items that they actually analyze as part of a program portfolio analysis that they want to share with the group. Anything else that you all think about? All right. Well, don't hear anything right now, but if you do think of things that you actually think about in analyzing your portfolio, I encourage you to share those in the chat box as we move forward with today's presentation. So now that we've done some analysis of your existing portfolio, I want to talk a little bit about program priority identification. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but here are some ideas on priorities that you might want to think about in regards to your identification of priorities. So again, we've talked a little bit about geography already with this idea that identifying where those geographic gaps are and really thinking about how you want to spread AmeriCorps resources throughout your state, I think is very, very important. Another area to think about is emerging state data trends and needs. So if you're hearing about a particular data trend about shifting in demographics in your state or other needs that are emerging in your state, really trying to kind of better understand those pieces so that you can develop programming around that. I think one interesting example of that is actually the Iowa Refugee Corps. And so that this Corps was actually established as a way to really provide wraparound services and support to refugees that were coming to the state of Iowa. And this program really has helped make that transition much more for those individuals as well. So again, that was an emerging need that was identified, and a program was then developed in order to address that. I think, again, issue areas is always one where I think folks really think about those priorities. And again, so think about what's lacking in your portfolio, or if you have a really strong program in a particular issue area that you think could be doing more, is that an opportunity also to really prioritize that? The next one that we commonly hear about for commissions, and this is not surprising, are your governor's priorities. So what is your governor really focused on? Are they focused on education? Are they focused on the environment? Are they focused on economic development? Probably there's a mixture there, right? But really understanding your governor's priorities and determining how national service could help align and support some of those priorities, I think is really, really important. And often too, once your governor is more familiar with the work of the commission and the funding sources too, it's an opportunity to grow national service and volunteering within your state. A nice example of that certainly is the Commonwealth Corps in Massachusetts. And although this is not an AmeriCorps program specifically, this is something where the governor and the state legislature came together many years ago and actually put together state funding that helps support an AmeriCorps-like program in the state of Massachusetts, or I should say the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that really addresses a number of community and statewide needs. So again, something where that was alignment with the governor's interests and an opportunity for the commission to really develop something in that area. The next is state legislative priorities. So again, you have a state legislature, they have a number of priorities. There are members who are probably very supportive of the work of the commission. Better understanding their priorities and determining if you can secure state funding to help support program expansion and really just support national service in general, I think is a very positive piece as well. A great example of that, certainly, that I know many of you are familiar with, is the Reading Corps in Minnesota. So that was, kind of a partnership between the State Service Commission there, so Minnesota, as well as a very interested state legislator who really cared about education and reading for youth, really elementary school students. And so that they were able to really secure state funding then to help expand the Reading Corps across the state of Minnesota. And then I know many of you have Reading Corps models now in your state as well. So again, that was something where there was alignment between the commission and a state legislator, and that was allowed that program to grow. Mayoral priorities too, for some of you, working with mayors may make a lot of sense as well, and having them better understand how service can be a strategy for them locally. And so really thinking about if you have some significant or mayors that really are influential around the state, really working with some of them to kind of better understand their needs and their interests as well, I think is a good one. A classic example here, it would be the Detroit Urban Safety Corps in Michigan, where both actually the governor and the mayor at the time in Detroit partnered together to really launch that Urban Safety Corps program. So again, aligning the interests of the mayor in Detroit was a way to create and expand that program in Detroit. So again, thinking about those electeds and what their priorities are and how you can align national service resources to them, I think is a very positive piece. The next one, I think an obvious one certainly, but I think something that we should always consider in thinking about the priorities we want to pursue is what are the corporation's priorities? What are they outlining in the NOFO as priorities? And also, too, what are they signaling to us via the program development grant priority areas as well? I think that those are pieces that we should be definitely considering in all of this. Now, the one thing I just want to say here is that I wouldn't encourage you to put all of your eggs in the corporation priority basket. If you have very strong programs that aren't necessarily in those CNCS funding areas or priority areas, that's okay, right? Like high quality programs are always going to be the ones that rise to the top here. But if you do have a strong program model in a corporation funding area, I think that that's something that you should consider, especially forwarding those programs to the competitive pool. And then also, and I think this is obvious as well, but really taking a step back and what are the priorities of your commission, both your commissioners and your staff? Are there things that you all think are really important based on what you see in your particular state? And also, what priorities were identified in your state service plan? I know that some states utilize the state service plan more than others to really direct their work, but in either case, really understanding kind of what are those priorities that you all have articulated over the course of several years, how can those really inform your grant making strategy as well? So I think, and of course there are other priorities as well. Do other folks have any other kind of things that you think about as priority identification that you want to share with the group? And Paul, from Colorado said, thinking about shifting political priorities of newly electeds like governors. Yeah, so I think that's always something to be mindful of. And particularly, we know a number of you are going to have potentially new governors next year. And so I also think, too, better understanding your gubernatorial candidates in your state and what their interests are, and seeing potentially if you can get some stuff in the pipeline that may be of interest to them once they take office, I think is also something that's really powerful as well. Well, again, I want to encourage people to share examples as they come to mind for them. So now let's talk a little bit about analysis techniques. So these are kind of, here's some of the things you might want to think about. Once you've identified what you think those priorities are, maybe you've narrowed them down to 2 or 3 priorities that you're really going to focus on for the next couple of years. How do you actually kind of analyze this and put a plan together for action? So again, these are some suggestions. Again, you're going to want to tailor this to the needs of your state and what makes sense for your commission. But again, some things for you to be thinking about in this regard. So first is reviewing data regarding the issue or geographic area in your state. So if you pick a particular issue, like really understanding the raw data and what's driving that in your state, I think is really important. If you're focusing on expanding a particular geographic area, what do you know about the economy of that particular area? Who are core leaders in that area? Are there organizations that are particularly important to be partnering within that area? Really understanding, again, what it looks like in that issue or that geographic area, I think is really, really important. Many of you have state I can't say that word this morning, demographers' offices, demographer, that's what I'm trying to say, offices, or something like it may be your legislative analyst office or others. But basically, in most states, there is an office that really focuses on demographic data and trends. And so really consulting with them and better understanding what they're seeing in a particular issue or geographic area also could be really valuable to you as well. For issues in particular, we want to really encourage you to identify key state agencies and departments or other statewide networks and associations that fund work in this area. So a great example here would be, for example, in Washington State, Serve Washington partners with the Washington Department of Veteran Affairs to support their Washington Vet Corps. So again, they identified a key state agency in an issue area where they felt that National Service could play an important role, and they were able to work with them to develop that program and to support that program over the years. So again, identifying those key state agencies and departments I think is really helpful. Also, they could potentially be a source of matching funds for the AmeriCorps dollars as well. And so those relationships take time to develop, but really talking to those different state departments and agencies about the work of your commission and your interest in supporting their work and helping them achieve their mission, I think can be a very powerful conversation that you may want to consider. I touched on this a little bit already, but for geography, I'm thinking about, again, the key organizations, public and nonprofit, that are thought and service delivery leaders in that region. So, particularly in many communities, and we've all experienced this, right? There are like key organizations, nonprofits that everyone looks to in that particular community that are really, really important. So understanding who those are and having conversations with them about what they think is important or what they're seeing, I think is also a very important piece of research that you're going to want to do. In either of these cases, if you're focusing on particular issues or geography, you want to definitely determine the key needs and strategies and how National Service might address those challenges. It's really important for you to do some thinking about that. You may not have all the answers, and no one expects you to, but really trying to think about how you see those pieces fitting together. And I think another one that's often overlooked, but that could be a great piece of information for you as well, is actually talking to your CNCF state office. So if you are looking to go into a new geographic area in your state, has the state office funded VISTA programs there before? Is there senior corps presence in that particular part of the state? Really understanding what the state office is seeing in a particular region or with a particular issue can help you identify potential organizations and individuals that you might need to talk to or want to talk to as you broach that subject or kind of go into that area. So again, something for you to think about if you haven't done that already. So a few more things for you to think about on analysis techniques is reaching out to the key players and determining the interest and opportunity there. So what I would say here is I think that this is very powerful. The deeper those relationships that you can develop, I think that the better, but certainly recognize that, as we all know, AmeriCorps is not easy. It's complicated, especially if you are not familiar with National Service. And so really making sure that you're allotting yourself enough time for those conversations and for people to really understand what is the opportunity that you're presenting to them via National Service. So allow that time and understand that multiple conversations may be necessary. To the degree possible, relying on your governor's office, your commissioners, or other key stakeholders that you work with to assist with introduction. So if you're going into a new geographic region, but a commissioner knows someone there and can really help with an introduction, that can be really powerful. If your governor's office, if you have a good relationship there and they can help with introductions as well, that can be really powerful for you to be able to kind of open the door so that you can start those conversations. Also want to encourage you to identify potential matching fund sources, right? As we know, match can be a huge hurdle for potential programs to get off the ground. So if there are ways that you can identify potential matching fund sources as part of these conversations, I think that that can be very powerful. Again, that might be through a partnership with a state department or, in your particular state. It might be that there's a foundation or other corporate sector funders that are very interested in a particular issue area and might be willing to help fund part of your match dollars. So again, thinking about those pieces and really what's that long-term funding strategy is an important consideration here as well. Also identifying who your likely grantees are going to be, whether those be local organizations, if you have intermediaries, if there's other organizations in the region, and or maybe your approach is that you're going to take an existing program and have them expand geographically as well. But really understanding who likely the grantees are going to be will be helpful for you in developing those partnerships and targeting your outreach. And then to the last point there, again, can existing grantees expand into new regions or a complementary issue area in what they're already doing? Again, they have the infrastructure in place. They understand what it takes to run an AmeriCorps program. Can they assist you in going into those new areas or potentially doing programming in areas that maybe are just slightly different, but definitely complementary to the work that they do already? So those are some thoughts about kind of analysis techniques that you may want to consider. And again, I should say, I know we're sharing a lot of information today, but again, we will have the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation will be available to you all, so you can kind of go back and look at this and think about how this plays out for your particular state commission. I want to pause for a second and see if folks have any comments or suggestions or things that they've done in their state related to this that have been really successful that they'd like to share with others. I know there's been some success out there about this, so would love for you to share that with one another. All right, well, as we come towards the end of the call, definitely want to encourage folks to share those types of ideas and things that they've been doing on that front. So we're going to move on now to strategy considerations. So we talked about kind of doing all of this back work in order to develop your particular strategy and how you're going to move forward. So wanted to share with you the considerations that Service Year Alliance, our partner in this webinar series, actually utilizes and when they think about how they're going to move forward. And I think that some of this is very applicable to state commissions. Some of it may be a little bit different because they are a national nonprofit organization, but thought that there was some good value in this approach that you might want to consider, again, as you're developing that strategy for your commission. So need, as we know, identifying the need for the AmeriCorps program is a critical part of any successful program. And so one of the things that certainly Service Year looks at is what's the opportunity for a compelling proof point or potential to develop service as a strategy here. So really understanding that piece of it and what that added component that National Service is going to bring that's going to help address that need, I think is really, really important. Evidence-based model, as you all know, an important part of being successful in securing AmeriCorps funding at this point in time is really focusing on an evidence base. Now we know that the corporation continues to fund programs that are in the preliminary stage of evidence, but certainly if you have an evidence-based model, that certainly puts a leg up, I think, in many ways, so something to think about there. So is there existing evidence that this program could be a high impact program, and does it also to have strong and appropriate roles for members? I think that's important to think about too. Again, what are the members going to be doing specifically, and how will that impact the community need? Funding, we already talked about this a little bit in the previous slides, but this idea of looking at are there predictable and significant sources of funding, both public and private, that could help support this new programmatic direction or these priorities that you're looking at, an important thing to think about. It's not fun to spend a lot of time and energy in developing a new program and cobbling together that matching funding and then find out that that's not a sustainable source of funding and really puts that program in jeopardy in future years. So really thinking about the long game here, I think, is important for long-term success. And then also to the pipeline, is there interest and demand amongst potential members to serve in a program of this type, right? So if it's something that of course, it's a strong community need and there's evidence behind it and there is also funding, but members aren't likely to be very interested in serving in that capacity. And that's something to consider, right? We all know that recruitment and retention is an important part of the work that we do. And so really making sure that there's a match there or a potential match, because sometimes that can be hard to gauge, but thinking about that, I think, is an important piece as well. Some other things to think about too. Pathways. Are there post-service or career opportunities for members that might serve in this program? Again, I think we're finding that folks are really thinking about how AmeriCorps can be a stepping stone to a career path for them. And so if you can clearly articulate how a member serving in this program will lead them to an opportunity for professional development and growth down the road, that can be very, very powerful. You know, I think the classic example of this obviously are members that serve in the education space as a way to kind of test to see if they might want to be a teacher. And then again, they go on and become a certified teacher later on. So again, that kind of idea that the AmeriCorps experience is exposing the member to an opportunity, maybe confirming that this is an area that they want to spend their professional life in, and then gives them kind of that step up as they take that next step along the way. Public appeal, so we talked a little bit about this in the priorities piece in regards to governors, your state legislature, as well as local elected officials. But is this particular area, does this have political saliency? Is it an important issue to voters, elected officials, et cetera? So what we mean by that is that if voters and community members see that AmeriCorps is impacting this need in their community that is really, really important, that really just helps, again, demonstrate the power of service. And so really kind of thinking about that, that probably shouldn't be the lead thing that you're considering in all of this, but certainly one thing that you might want to think about as well. And then the next one I think is really critically important, you all know this, is capacity, right? Is there a presence of a strong network or infrastructure that could support the model at scale, or a network of organizations that could be banding together to support this work, but really making sure that that capacity exists, or that you, in a reasonable amount of time and support, can really help build the capacity necessary to run a high-quality service program. And then finally here is community interest. Is there demand from communities to expand opportunities in this issue area through new or existing models? So what are you hearing bubbling up? And if there's something that's really bubbling up consistently, that could really help drive your strategy. So in particular areas, for example, like homelessness, which we know is an issue in communities across the country, what are the approaches that the cities, counties, et cetera, are taking to homelessness in their areas? And kind of really, how could national service be part of that? Because we know that that is an issue, for example, that really the community often is really focused on and really wants to help better understand how they can solve for homelessness in their particular area. So again, something to think about there. So again, those are some of the things that Service Year Alliance thinks about as they go into new issue areas when they're working with their impact communities across the country, and thought that that framework might be of value to you as well. Want to pause for a second. Are there any questions or comments regarding the strategy consideration piece? All right. So we're going to go ahead now and move on a little bit to outreach strategies. So I think, you've done that analysis of your portfolio. You better understand the issue, the geographic space that you might be working in. You put together kind of a strategy. So the next part here really, again, is that outreach piece of it, and really how you're thinking about cobbling this together. So, again, you may be a come one, come all state because that's what you're required to do, and that certainly makes sense. But if you are interested in developing new programs in a particular issue or geographical region, really thinking about how can you add to your network list in order to encourage potential interest from your targets. So adding those network lists, either issue area or geography, to your invites for general outreach sessions can be a really important way to expose more or build awareness from folks about national service and AmeriCorps. You might want to attend network-specific events and provide information regarding national service funding. So if you feel, for example, that you want to be really focused on the after-school space, that's a priority for you. Finding out when are the big after-school statewide conferences or kind of other places where after-school practitioners may gather, and being present there, either by maybe providing a workshop or having a table or both, could be a great way for you to, again, network and expose folks to the opportunity that AmeriCorps could provide to their work. encouraging planning grants. So we will be doing a specific session about planning grants as part of this series, and I know that a lot of you have been really thinking about planning grants as a way to really diversify your portfolio and grow your portfolio. But again, thinking about how planning grants could be used as a way to introduce potential applicants to national service. We all know that it's really hard if you've had exposure to AmeriCorps previously to go from 0 to 60 in a short period of time. And so planning grants can be a great tool for you in really helping potential organizations, or potential programs get off the ground. And also, too, you may want to consider, if you do have particular priorities or geographic areas that you're focused on, aligning your planning grant process to those priorities is a great way to really cultivate that group or that potential pool of applicants down the road. Determining if a joint funding relationship might be possible with other funders in a key issue area in our geographic region. So we're also going to be focused on this as another part of the webinar series as well, but how do you work with other funders to really highlight the program model to potentially secure matching funds for this? And also, too, if they're funding in a particular issue area, they likely have a network of grantees, right, that they are providing funds to. So how can you outreach to them, talk with them about national service as well? So really determining if that joint funding relationship could be a powerful tool for you is something that you might want to consider as well. And then if you don't do this already, I know most of you do, but if you don't do this already, also identify adopting funding priorities in your NOFO and grant making process. So I know with some states, it can be a very complicated process to put priorities into your NOFO document, and even if that is the case, but really thinking about what are those things that you want to highlight in your NOFO. Again, most people, when they are applying for a grant, are really going to want to better understand what you as the funder are interested in, what your priorities are, and seeing if they actually fit into that. So being really clear about what those priorities are. Again, you're going to fund high quality programs no matter what, but if you have a high quality applicant along with meeting one of your priorities, that can be a win-win for everybody. So really be thinking about that piece as well. So next is training technical assistance strategy. So I think, a key part that we also see with program development is what is your training technical assistance strategy for potential applicants and those new programs. So I think that one of the things that we see here, and again, everyone approaches this a little bit differently, but I think, you probably do your general outreach session, but what additional assistance are you providing to applicants as they're developing their applications to you? Again, if your state law allows for that, I think is important. And again, our belief is the more that you can front load that, the more information. Again, we don't want to overwhelm potential applicants, but the more that they understand what they're getting themselves into and what are the key elements of a quality program, the earlier that they understand and recognize that, I think is to your benefit, right? So thinking about how you are really front loading that assistance, and that can really help you get those programs off the ground sooner as well. So be thinking about that. I think another powerful thing too is if they're not familiar with national service, is make sure that they really understand what they're getting themselves into, right? And I mean that with all love and respect. But do they understand what national service really looks like on the ground? Is there an opportunity for them to visit other AmeriCorps programs in their area or in the issue area that they might be working in, so they can really understand the piece that AmeriCorps members play in all of that, what that looks like on an everyday basis, and then what the staffing looks like behind that too. I think it's important for them to understand that. And if there's an opportunity for you to kind of help facilitate that, that can be a great way for them to understand. We know that many of you at this point in time, when you have planning grantees, you're actually having planning grantees budget time and money to go do a peer site visit, so they, again, understand what it looks like on the ground. So again, I think that that's a great strategy to make sure that the potential applicant understands what they're walking into. And I also think, too, for a specific region, especially if it's an area where you have not had a footprint or not a very large footprint, assist the interested organizations in thinking through their member placements with like organizations and sources of matching funds. So that, again, that there's some thought there that, again, they're not trying to place 20 members maybe all in one place, but they're really thinking about like organizations or partnering organizations that also could benefit from AmeriCorps and what that could look like in their particular state. Those are all, there's many more things that you're going to want to think about for your training technical assistance strategy, but those are a few things that we wanted to highlight for you today. So in talking about all of this, I think one of the things that we haven't talked about and yet is really important, right, is that if you you can spend a lot of time and energy on program development, right? It can be very consuming, and that can be a really positive thing. But obviously, we know that state commissions, you have a lot of other work that you're responsible for as well. So I think it's really important too for you to really right size your approach to program development to the resources that you can dedicate for that. So that really comes down to the staffing consideration as well. And I think it's really important that you are clear about this internally as commission staff, but also that your commissioners have the right expectations about this as well. So there are a number of ways that we have seen state commissions approach this. And certainly, again, it may be your approach to this may be a coupled together of all of these, but it's some things for you to be thinking about here. So many commissions will provide a portion of program officers' time related to this, or they have a staff person dedicated either full-time or part-time to program development and outreach. So again, understanding the time commitment of your AmeriCorps team related to this, I think is important. We know a number of commissions with the program development funds have started to have part-time or full-time person that is really dedicated to program development and outreach. And if that's something that your commission can do, I think certainly that provides you more flexibility, but also understanding that that may not be the case for all commissions. It's also common for us to see that a portion of the executive director's time may be committed to relationship building and new outreach. And especially that often would be done with kind of talking to other potential funders, those conversations with the governor's office, developing relationships with key state legislators and others. So really thinking about how you're using your ED's time for those types of conversations is important, and budgeting accordingly for that as well. And then we also recognize that, particularly through the program development grants, that many of you are using consultants to help with this. In many cases, the consultants may be mapping and identifying potential partners, whether it be the issue area or geographic approach. Some of you also are using those folks to help on the outreach front as well. And so certainly using consultants in this way is particularly and completely appropriate. So something to think about if your staff doesn't necessarily have the bandwidth for this, that can be a great way too, particularly if the consultants are kind of issue area experts in a particular issue. That can be a great way to make sure that they're bringing that expertise that they bring to the table into your conversations as well. I just want to remind you that there's a number of ways too that you can fund this work. Commission support grant certainly is appropriate. Commission investment fund, as you all know, goal number one of the Commission investment fund guidance is around program development, particularly in underserved regions. So that's certainly appropriate as you think about future Commission investment fund applications. The program development grant that we know that many of you have received from the corporation. And then also too, you may have other state or private resources that have been given to the Commission to focus in particular issue areas primarily. And again, those sources of funding could be helpful to you in kind of cobbling together your staffing strategy as well. So just something to think about with all of that. Again, there are additional ways that commissions have staffed this, but we did want to underline that really this does take time. It does take energy. It's not always success the first time out of the gate. And so really making sure that you're being thoughtful about the time that you need for staff in order for this to work, I think is really, really important as you're having these conversations internally. So with that, I wanted to just offer up a couple of resources from our partners at Service Year Alliance that we thought would be of interest to you. Many of you are already familiar with the Expanding Service Years and States Toolkit that we released earlier this year. And what this toolkit does, and this is available on Basecamp. So if you go into Basecamp, you'll be able to find this. It's also available on the Ask website as well as the Service Year website. But basically, it identifies ways that governors and other kind of elected officials have used service years to really implement priorities in their area. So if you're looking for some inspiration, some particular program models that might resonate for you and work in your state, I think this is a great resource for you to do that. So wanted to point that to you. And then another resource from Service Year is creating a service year program. So this is very specific, and I just want to let everyone know the language is very much about creating new service years and not necessarily new AmeriCorps programs, although there certainly is overlap there and kind of approach and how you might go about that tactically. But that being said, I do think that if you are looking at ways that you might think about working with new programs to kind of help them along the pathway of developing a new program, this can be a great resource for you. It's my understanding from our friends at Service Year that they are working on updating this, and there probably will be a new version of this in 2018, but did want to share the current version of this with you, as it could be a good resource tool for you as you think about this. So with that, I want to open it up for questions, comments, suggestions that folks may have related to any of this content that we've shared today? Thank you, Paul. So Paul in Colorado says it's very helpful. That's great. Paul, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in Colorado right now? I'll let you type that into the chat box while I read Adam from Rhode Island. So Adam, a takeaway for me today was the pathway of members to future careers, recruitment, and finding opportunities for new programs. Yeah, I think that that's something that's really important to think about definitely in this day and age. And we know that recruitment continues to be an issue for so many of you and so many of your programs. So kind of thinking about how that can be pitched as a potential thing for a member to consider, I think can be really powerful. Does anyone have any kind of program development success stories that they'd like to share, whether it be work that they did this past year in the opioid space or safer community space, or things that they are considering for the year ahead? And you can go ahead and talk on the phone line if you'd like, or the chat box is, welcome as well. So Paul from Colorado added, development is something I'm particularly interested in, so looking at dedicating some of my CSG time, looking to get more into rural areas, leveraging out new opioid grant work. Yeah, so I think that, one of the things, and this is actually will be a topic for one of our upcoming pieces as well, and actually I'm going to just move, we can still have some questions and answers and discussion here, but one of the things I just want to show you is what we're thinking about for these upcoming webinars as well. So one is going to be about rural outreach and scaling, because we do know that there are a unique set of challenges often in developing programming in rural areas. So we really want to talk about kind of what we're hearing, what we're learning around that, and share that with you so that hopefully that can be a resource for you as you think about that work in your particular state. Other examples of success or interest areas that they have in their state at this point. Okay, so I want to again highlight for you on the screen right now, you're going to see the upcoming series webinars. And so Paul, you just asked, will we be discussing intermediary models in upcoming Pauls? We will. So what you see in front of you now is the schedule of the upcoming webinars. So November 30th, which is going to be our next webinar, we're going to be focused on planning grants. So again, we know that a number of state commissions use planning grants as a way to really help develop new programs. So we're going to talk about some of the best practices there and what's been learned along the way. December 14th, we're planning to focus on intermediary models. We've done some sessions about intermediary models over the years. Also, Service-C Alliance has been doing some focused work in really trying to understand what makes intermediaries successful. What are those kind of key elements? So we're looking to share that with you in December. In January, we're going to be focused on rural outreach and scaling. So kind of, again, what are those best practices? What have we been hearing from commissions and others about how rural outreach can be successful? February 22nd is networking with other funding networks and funders. So here is really like, how do you actually develop a strategy and approach to going to other funders and pitching national service, and that they want to be a co-funder with you in this space, and really how do you demonstrate to them national service funding can help meet their goals as well. So that will be the focus of February 22nd. I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. And then finally, March 29th, leveraging commission foundations for program development. So we know that a number of state commissions have separate commission foundations, and what we've noticed in our research is that actually a number of those commissions actually don't support program development. They're focused on other areas such as governor's volunteer awards, things of that nature, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, and we're not suggesting that's the case. But what we also want to have a conversation about is how could those foundations actually be helping to support program development as well. So that will be the topic of conversation on March 29th. So hopefully that feels like it will be a good series to kind of continue this conversation about program development and the approaches that you as a state commission can take to support that work. Again, I know there was a lot of information today, but we will be recording each of these webinars, and we will also have the PowerPoint that's available to folks as well. I also want to encourage you, if this kind of spurred your thinking and you want to talk a little bit more about it, encourage you to reach out to Ask Staff. We're all very interested in supporting your work in this area, so if we can be a thought partner with you on this and talk about kind of some of the challenges that you're seeing and how you're thinking about approaching that, please know that we are very committed to being a support to you in that as well. Are there any last questions, comments, suggestions? Any topics that you really would like to see included in this series that you don't see at this point? If there are, we'd love to hear about that as well. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for being part of today's webinar. Again, we hope that this is valuable information for you. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Ask Staff, and we're happy to answer those and again, be a thought partner to you. So with that, have a great rest of the day, and we hope that you'll join us for our next webinar on November 30th regarding planning grants. Thanks, everyone.